To save some time, I've created a page to make it easier for you to follow along as we create this more complex swap image behavior. You'll find this in the Nature Photographer site in the Galleries folder. It's called swapimage.html. Just double-click to open it from the Files panel, or choose File Open and select it that way. Notice that in this file there's a div tag on the left in the main space called Thumbnails, and I'm going to use that to contain 3 smaller images on the left that will serve as triggers to change the image on the right side of the page, which will be a bigger image. I think as you follow along you'll get the idea. Click to insert your cursor in this div on the left, and then choose Insert Image. Let's start with the egret picture. Make sure you choose the egret 175. Again, I often name images based on their file size. I'm going to give this just very simple alt text for the purposes of this lesson. So just typing in egret as the alt text. Here's a simple little tip. If I use the right arrow key, I can deselect the image and get my cursor just to the right of it. Then if I hit the return key, my cursor's in exactly the place I want to insert the second image. So Insert, Image, and this time I'm going to use the elk image that's 175 pixels wide. Again, just typing elk as some simple alternate text, and arrow to the right, hit the return key, and you see my cursor is exactly where it needs to be. And just to show you, you can always use the common insert menu to insert an image as well. Note that if you just completed the exercise with the rollover image, that rollover image icon will be at the top here, and you'll need to click on the arrow to select Image to insert an image this way. Otherwise, you'll bring up the rollover dialog. So now let me insert the last image. I'll just grab the owl picture, type in owl for my alternate text, and I have 3 pictures lined up here on the left. And if I place my cursor just to the right of this div with the ID Thumbnails, you see the cursor appears here, and I can insert a bigger image here on the right. So again, Insert Image, and this time I want you to choose the egret that is 500 pixels wide. So now you see I have a bigger image here on the right, and I have 3 smaller images here on the left. And what I want to do is create an effect that will change the image on the right when someone triggers the image on the left. That is to say, if someone rolls over this elk image, I want a picture of elk to appear on the right instead of the egret. To do this, I'm going to use the swap image behavior, but before I even do that, here's a very important preliminary step. You first need to assign an ID to each of the images on the page that you want to be able to affect with this swap image behavior. That ID enables the JavaScript code to identify each of the images and identify which image should be swapped when someone rolls a cursor over another image. So if I select this first image, you'll see here in the Property Inspector in the very left side here, the ID field is the place you want to add an ID. I'm going to call this egret. Now remember, we have 3 different names now for this image. I have a file name called egret-175. I have alternative text which will appear in the code behind the page and will instruct someone who can't see the images or someone who the page is being read to. That's the alternate text for the image. Here is the ID. You can use the same word in all 3 places, but they're very different functions. Once again, however, you should note IDs should have no spaces and no special characters. This is especially important with JavaScript. You can't even use dashes or underscores in these IDs. Now let me select this one and I'll call it elk. And finally, owl. Now this image here on the right, I could call egret, but in this case, you should not use exactly the same ID for 2 images on the page. You need to have a unique identifier for each image. And here's a tip. This is the image that I'm going to want to change when someone rolls their cursor over these images. So it would be helpful to call this image something that will help me remember this is the main image. This is the image I'm going to swap when I set up the swap image behavior. So it might be a good idea to call this something like main. So I'm going to call this image main, even though this one's called egret. And although you don't have to identify any image that you're not going to actually use in the JavaScript, let's go ahead and call this one banner, just so we know what it is when we see it in the swap image behaviors dialog. Now let's go ahead and save the page, just so we know that all of this stuff is recorded and in place. And now we're ready to start setting up this swap image behavior. I'm going to start with the bottom image, with this smaller image of the owl here, so that you can really see what's going on here, because when you set up the swap image on the egret, you're going to bring up the image that's already here. Which begs the question, what's the first image that should appear on the page? Well, that's whatever image you want to appear when the page first loads. The other images, the ones you only want to appear when someone rolls their cursor over a thumbnail or a smaller image, are the ones you'll set up with the swap image behavior.